I also misread Ford when I began this project. I was concerned only with the second part of my title, human rights. For me, it was just a happy coincidence that Ford's presidency from 1974 to 1977 happens to overlap with what scholars have called a human rights revolution. So let me give some background on that. The Cold War consensus, which lasted roughly from World War II through Vietnam, revolved around the military containment of the Soviet Union. Amidst Vietnam, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon developed détente as a new approach to ease tensions through international conferences on arms reductions, et cetera, et cetera. Yet, during the Ford years especially, many conservative Americans felt détente amounted to an appeasement of Soviet power and a betrayal of those still living beyond the Iron Curtain. Similar, in some ways, to how some might feel today about negotiations with North Korea. Many liberals resented Kissinger's cold-blooded chess game of global affairs displayed in Indochina and Chile, as Julia described earlier, and around the world. Thus, in this period, both conservatives and liberals employed human rights rhetoric in their critique of foreign policy. So at the beginning of, maybe a year ago, I sought to explore the nature and limitations of this criticism. To what degree was it legitimately humanitarian, and to what degree was it politically calculated? But that was too vague and broad. I needed a specific case to investigate. The answer was right in front of me. Strolling around the Ford Library, I realized that in all my research, I'd never found a direct connection between human rights scholarship and Ford scholarship. Ford's ambassador, UN ambassador, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, came closest when he wrote in 1977, "It is odd that the issue of human rights, which came so naturally to him, nonetheless eluded Gerald Ford." He continued, "Had he taken it up, it might have enabled him to win the 1976 election. That he did not, and his opponents did, almost certainly helped him to lose it." So to address this apparent paradox, I had my work cut out for me. Ford was an unusual president, and his scholarship is limited. He spent 25 years of his pre-presidential career in the House of Representatives. He was the only president who never sought the office, which he took out of duty, not ambition. These circumstances may in part explain Moynihan's paradox. Ford did not exude charisma, political vision, or rhetorical capacity, as Chevy Chase famously pointed out. In Ford's time, human rights was not an obvious issue to take up, and to seize it as a political opportunity required a shrewdness that might have been beyond him. Moreover, those who did take up human rights, including Carter, of course, and also Henry Jackson, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Rumsfeld, directed it against the policy of détente. Ford was a deep believer in the policy of détente as a method for long-term peace and stability, and he would not sacrifice this long-term peace for short-term political gains. Yet I found nothing to support Chase's initial characterization of Ford as a totally compassionless man. On the contrary, I found human rights of a sort did come naturally to Ford. To his great political expense, Ford secured evacuation aid for Vietnamese refugees in direct opposition to Congress, the military, the CIA, and public opinion, which was strongly against that aid. He cut support for apartheid governments in Southern Africa, which immediately allowed Reagan to sweep the Texas vote, but he did it anyways, and supported the Helsinki Accords, which, despite massive domestic opposition, secured the freedom and human rights of East Europeans. Nonetheless, Jimmy Carter, who took up human rights only after the Democratic primaries, and whose use of human rights drew more from the conservative anti-détente sentiments than many now remember, retains his monopoly on our memory of human rights politics. Before this project, Ford was granted no place at all in human rights history. Yet my investigation into why has taught me as much about Ford as it has about this so-called revolution. I would like to thank my advisor, Professor Jonathan Marble again, Professors Tinilian, Professor Bellinger, my family, Janis Gohertz. Thank you so much.